The Pantheon in Rome is a building I've gone to, and I was absolutely in awe of this master structure. It has this opening to the sky and this gorgeous dome that still stays with me today. And it was about 15 years ago when I was there.
I was there a
But
long time ago as well, and I remember it was raining that day, and I stood under the oculus and I looked up and I got wet, and I was just amazed. I was indoors and I'm
I
wet,
know,
you know.
and I couldn't believe it's built over 2000 years ago. What do you know the date of it, or does anyone know
Uh,
the actual date of it?
it's around 2,000 years ago, and it's made of reinforced concrete, a technology that wasn't rediscovered in, I think, until the 18th century.
Hmm.
And it's really a magnificent structure. There's a, a sphere that fits perfectly within the volume of the
Hmm.
Pantheon. And I was aware of that fact prior. But I took this section drawing. I think it was Piranesi made this, a wonderful Renaissance kind of artist. And
Mm.
I superimposed John Michel's squaring the circle diagram that he published in a book, City of Revelation, in 1973. Turns out this diagram is something that he rediscovered. It's
Mhm.
obviously very ancient. It structures Stonehenge and it encodes the Great Pyramid slope angle. And lo and behold, it also encodes the geometry of the Pantheon. Because if you look at this, you'll see how perfectly this geometry matches up with the
Mhm.
section drawing. Um, I find it kind of gives me the chills when I first brought this together. I'm like, oh my God, it fits perfectly. Look at how the square
Yeah,
is right on the floor, and
the
it goes
nice,
all the way
good
up,
type of chills it
goes
gives
right
you.
up to the oculus, and how the triangle inside, which represents the Great Pyramid slope angle, it determines the size of the oculus, you know.
Hmm.
And
Mm.
I think we could talk about what's in this diagram. Like what else
Mm.
it does squaring the circle. What does that mean, Geoff?
Hmm. Well, it's one of our favorite archetypes, you know. On a basic level, it's like the union of two opposing but complementary archetypes. So, for example, it's often used to represent the kind of the integration of the qualities of heaven with the properties of earth, you know, or it could be a metaphor for marrying all of those kind of uncertain, elusive, difficult to grasp entirely concepts, you know, like maybe pi or phi or infinity, you know, these would all be circular concepts, you know.
Well,
And
quite
then
literally, the circle, the circumference is the pi times its diameter. And so
yeah.
their pi is encoded in every circle. And then
Mm.
the square is so mundane and so
And
rational and
definite.
simple
Yeah.
and measurable.
Hmm.
And so this diagram has the perimeter of the square is equal to the circumference of the circle. So it's
Hmm.
squaring the circle by length. It's also
Hmm.
possible to square the circle by area, but that's a different trip.
Hmm.
And look at how the difference in size between the circle and the square determines the thickness of the drum of the Pantheon, the wall thickness. And so, because of these factors, the architect in me says this is clearly the blueprint for the Roman Pantheon. And
Yeah.
it also kind of shows you that they must have known this 2,000 years ago. And yet I've never read anything about them knowing that.
It's a
Um,
perfect fit. This one, I love this one, Scott, you know, and it's like, you know, there's so many symbols in this particular diagram because I know this diagram well. The circle that's inscribed inside the square, which kind of like seems to trace out the dome perfectly, you know, or as good as perfectly in my view, represents the earth. If that smaller circle above it is the moon, and then that smaller circle above it is actually like perfectly placed, if I'm right, just to carve out the opening in the roof, which is the oculus, you
correct.
know, like,
And I don't know if people are aware, but this diagram encodes the true proportions of moon and earth,
mm,
which is remarkable in itself. Um, And so that maybe that's why the architects of the Pantheon use this diagram, because it's so profound about
Mhm.
the the way that our Earth and Moon relate, the way that squaring the circle reconciles these opposites in some way. Um, and
Isn't the $1 million question, Scott? Um, like, did the designer of this particular building, the Pantheon, like go, oh, I have this really cool diagram. I'm really into the relationship of the Earth and the Moon. I'm going to build a building and encode all these geometries into it. Or is it more just like the designers of this building were in some sort of intuitive cosmic flow, and these archetypes kind of came through them and manifested in the building? Or is it just some random trip that you and me are on, and we're just placing something over something that happened to look similar? You know, like, which is it? Like, what
I'd
one
like
is
to
it of
hear
those?
what you all think about that. Which one of those options would you go for in explaining this resonance?